as long as it's forward. God, send me anywhere, only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me. And sever any tie in my heart except the tie that binds my heart to yours. If you have men who will only come if they know there is a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there is no road at all. I will go anywhere provided it be forward. David Livingston Seagull, 1813 to 1873.
Okay, thank you so much. Our theme at Gems from the Wisdom Traditions for this week is the theme of our dual nature. And we will be taking this up in a conversational circle format that is going to be preceded by someone giving us a little prefatory introduction to the topic. We're very fortunate today to have Ryan Quirk be the one who's giving it to you. And I want to tell you just a tiny bit about him. He's a 20-year-old psychology student in Santa Barbara, California, who's deeply passionate about the mind-body-spirit connection and how understanding this connection leads to self-mastery. This passion and inner transformation has led to his creation of his first book, An 18-Year-Old's Guide to Self-Mastery. So that was at least 2 years ago, obviously, that came out.
I underestimated how long it would take to write a book. So I started when I was 18 and I named it An 18-Year-Old's Guide to Self-Mastery. And then I published it right before turning 19. And then I wake up the next day and now I'm 20. So it's quite a lot, but thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this theme of our dual nature, because we see this duality made manifest in all of creation, right? This idea of body and spirit, matter and energy, day and night, dark and light. This dual nature is all around us, and when we come to understand it more, we can embrace a lot more love and wisdom and compassion in our lives. And so I thought that for today's talk, it would be very beneficial to talk about, I think, someone who really represents this understanding and this unity of our dual nature, which is the Indian saint and spiritual teacher Paramahansa Yogananda, who was a ambassador of Kriya Yoga. Yeah, and I'm also gonna have some personal little like kind of excerpts from my life and the understandings of the teachings that I've gained from him. But let us begin. So who was Paramahansa Yogananda? Say that 10 times fast. It's a pretty long name, very cool name. But Yogananda, that last name right there, it means union with bliss or union with love. So that was his spiritual title. Yogananda was originally born January 5th, 1893, and he lived until March 7th, 1952. And he was born in, I'm going to really have a hard time pronouncing this, Gorkupur, India. I'm struggling to pronounce that, but he was a saint who really influenced, along with the theosophical movement, a lot of spiritual teachings in the West. He was one of the first yogis to make his way all the way to the West, where he founded the Self-Realization Fellowship based out of LA, and they have other sites and temples and meditation groups all around the country. And he's most well known for his international best-selling book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, which is one of the first in-depth accounts of Yogananda's or any real Eastern yogic monk's entire life, where he gives a very deep and profound insight into his personal mystical experiences, his train of thought, so that he was really kind of one of these teachers who began to bridge this idea of the mystical with the scientific. He often called yoga the science of the soul. And he also was very keen on blending this idea of East and West, of living in the world and also making spiritual evolution, spiritual growth. And so that's why I thought he'd be perfect to discuss. He's been a life-changing teacher in my life. And if anyone ever gets the chance to read The Autobiography of a Yogi, it is absolutely a fascinating account of really a mystic's life. You know, when we hear of these ideas of saints or sages or gurus, we often think of them as just otherworldly beings. And what we find is that in that book in particular, Yogananda was also a human being, but just a very extraordinary one. He shows insights of humor, of feelings of grief and loss at times when his mother passed and other things like that. So it gives us a kind of sense that these beings that we call saints and gurus, although they might have extraordinary insights, are not so separate from us. So, what was Yogananda's mission? What was his life all about? Yogananda gave spiritual teachings around the world, and he most strongly seeked to blend what he kind of labeled as the materialistic and scientific West and the highly spiritual Eastern cultures. He felt that both cultures were slightly out of balance, where the East was struggling with a lot of poverty and disease due to only an overfocus on our spiritual nature, that other side of our dual nature. West was only concerned with our human nature and therefore lived a less spiritual and less moral life in general, where there was more of a pursuit of. Sorry, one moment here.
Setting some light.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all see me better now? Some more
Thank you.
right here. Yeah. Anyways, where he felt that the West was losing themselves too much in only materialistic pursuits. And so he seeked to balance this idea between our spirit and our human selves so that we could find more balance, so that we could blend these cultures and see that we're really not separate and that there isn't such a fine line as we might think between our human selves and our divine selves. We see a lot of spiritual teachers often totally neglecting our human lives, right? I remember, especially in my own spiritual journey and my own path of awakening, early on in my path, getting really into teachers that were saying to kind of have this idea of leave or renouncing the world, which again is not always a bad thing. These can be very wise teachers, but for many of us in the West today in particular, it just isn't really a totally viable option. And what I really love about the teachings of Yogananda is that he really blends this nature. I mean, a lot of spiritual teachers I've seen kind of neglect the needs of the human body, sometimes our emotions or our experiences. And what Yogananda is kind of saying here is that our spiritual life and our human life are not separate, and they're actually one. That our divine selves, our soul selves, and our physical body selves, our human selves, are one as well. One moment here, one moment. So Yogananda seeked to balance these two dimensions, and he did this mainly through the practice of Kriya Yoga, a technique by which one's soul or spiritual nature is able to be directly experienced, which, in his words, eliminate the need for hope or faith in terms of knowing your own spiritual nature. He often discussed hope and faith as very powerful and very necessary along a spiritual path, but that each person should be able to scientifically perceive the soul. That you didn't need to only have hope or faith in finding out that you are a spiritual being or a being of energy or a being of consciousness, that this was able to be perceived directly, and that each person should have the ability to experience this directly, which he gave through the practice of Kriya Yoga. At the same time, however, although he was obviously very focused on the spiritual dimension, Yogananda also often enjoyed meeting with businessmen. He liked discussing their success and their different adventures that they were participating in. And he also liked to discuss with scientists and their pursuits in technology and human advancement. And he even wrote 2 books that really help us in the human dimension. One is called Remolding Your Life, where he discusses how to bring about a state of health in your mind and your body, specifically for this lifetime, and as well as a book called The Law of Success, something that we really might be a kind of interesting or unique title to see from an Indian saint, right, who's a monk who wears robes and stuff like that, that he actually wrote a book called The Law of Success, helping people find success in their worldly endeavors. Yogananda often spoke about how true yoga is for anyone seeking a greater expanse of joy, love, happiness, and well-being in this life and in lives to come. His great guru, which is his guru's guru, he comes from a lineage of teachers, is known as Lahiri Mahasaya, and I'm just going to call him Lahiri because that last name is also a little bit hard to pronounce. But he discusses Lahiri being a very great yogi and a great teacher, not because he left the world and he only lived, in a cave in the Himalayas and didn't engage with his family or with his community, but because he was able to balance living a spiritual life as well as fully in the world as a human being. Lahiri went to work as an accountant for the local government, where after work he founded schools and taught children, as well as in the evenings leading meditation groups and continuing his own spiritual practices. Lahiri also founded, not founded, sorry, he was a disciple of another guru who taught Kriya Yoga. That was their path of yoga, which is very similar to Raja Yoga. I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well. Where this idea of exercising certain disciplines over the mind and body to achieve a greater perception and greater sense of our spiritual nature and a felt sense of oneness with all of life. And yeah, so Lahiri was able to pursue this spiritual path while also working as an accountant for the government, while also meditating morning and night. And he also initiated followers of all religions, people who followed Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism into the practices of Kriya Yoga because he also felt that there was a universality across all religion and that no one should be separated from being able to find their spiritual selves. Yogananda's guru in life was named Sri Yukteswar, who was a simple and wise man who often preached pillars of good human living and good living in physical life, such as a simple diet, regular exercise, regular time spent in nature, and the cultivation of loving relationships. So, what we're starting to see here when we look at the life of Yogananda, look at his teachers and what he represented, is that our spiritual lives and our physical lives, taking care of our body and our health, taking care of our relationships and our roles in the world, isn't so separate or doesn't have to be separate from living a very rich inner life or a spiritual life as well. Yogananda, in his early life, who was already seeking a spiritual path from the time he was just about 4 years old, often remarks in his own book and in his own words that he often wanted to run away from the physical world, what he calls the world of sorrow. He wanted many times, as he remarks, to go into the caves of the Himalayas and seek union with the universe or seek God in solitude and in silence. However, it was his own guru, Sri Yukteswar, who told him instead to found schools, serve others. He founded the Self-Realization Fellowship in the West to have this idea of blending the East and West, to teach, to travel, and in some measure, although this might not be the right wording, accomplished quite a lot in the world. Yogananda was a best-selling author, founded things worldwide, and was also able to reach some of what we would call some of the highest spiritual states. And so, in that way, Yogananda has been an incredibly influential teacher for me in my life because he was one of the first teachers where I didn't feel so threatened by him. Because looking at Yogananda, which there's a photo of him on the cover of the email for this meeting, he's an Indian saint, so he wears robes. He doesn't just wear like clothes that we might see day to day. He is a monk, so he follows certain monastic rules and stuff. But when I was reading the autobiography of a yogi and when I was getting into his teachings, I didn't feel so separate from him. I didn't feel like me being a young person in the West was so separate from this Indian monk, that he had similar challenges in life, similar aspirations for love, happiness, and joy for all. And it really got me thinking in terms of my own life path. And when I started practices like meditation and a deeper seeking of spirituality in my life, that my spiritual life and my human life, my physical life, weren't as separate as I thought. Like a lot of people on the spiritual path, when I first realized around the age of 15 or 16 that there was a deeper reality, an essence, a something or other that was beyond just the material world, I fell in love with it. That wonder and awe coursed through me when I would read about books that talked about past lives or talked about spiritual teachers or other spiritual dimensions of consciousness, which greatly fascinated me from a very, very young age. I remember being about 4 years old, where I would often ask my father things like, where do I come from? What does God look like? How big is the universe? How did the universe start? What does heaven look like? And all of these other questions. I myself was raised Christian, and I eventually left my church due to experiences of fear and hatred towards those who believe differently and who didn't align with the church values. And so when I was around 15 and I stumbled into the practice of meditation and spirituality, it very quickly consumed me because it kind of scratched that philosophical itch that I'd had from such a young age that I was struggling to find reconciliation for. And so when I first found my way into a type of spiritual path or a spiritual awakening, I stopped caring so much about things that were very relevant and important in my life. I stopped caring as much about relationships, about my schoolwork in high school. And for the most part, all I wanted to do was listen to Ram Dass, meditate, and go for walks in nature. And I remember often vividly showing up late to my morning math classes because I remember my morning routine was I would wake up, meditate, and I would drive around my town, often delaying going to the school that I dreaded so much, listening to Ram Dass lectures and seeking a greater sense of spirituality. And then when I finally would walk into the classroom, maybe an hour late to a kind of grim remark from the teacher, I would sit in the back of the class and just do mindful breathing for the whole time. So that was how I kind of first started my spiritual path. I really was trying to, in a sense, leave the world of sorrow the way Yogananda described it. However, something about this always felt off, and no matter how much I tried to run away from my humanity, I couldn't, because in truth, all of life, physical and non-physical life, is divine in nature. There is divinity that lives in humanity, and humanity is also a creation of the divine. And so too, then, are all the other things that we know in terms of our physical human lives, such as physical matter, finances, money concerns, relationships, our physical bodies, the need for human community and connection, and so on. And so, what I found as I was kind of exploring this idea of my spiritual nature versus my human nature is that they actually didn't have to be in competition with one another. I found that the universe was throwing me more and more into the life that I was actually trying to run away from. Somehow, despite my efforts to meditate and skip class and listen to Ram Dass, I found myself in a serious relationship, working in a business with my brother, and also becoming the captain of my high school hockey team. And so when I started listening to Yogananda, I eventually started to become much more lighthearted and actually started to throw myself into life more, not as a way of running away from my spirituality, but as a way of embracing it. What I realized is that my spiritual life and physical life didn't seem so separate anymore. Captaining a hockey team, I realized I had the chance to build a community and serve my teammates and represent my school. Running a business, I realized I could serve others. I ran a landscaping business, so I would mow their lawns and form relationships with my clients. It was also during a time where I was falling in love with a girl that I began to feel more of my spiritual nature than ever before. I began to see my own love and my own divinity more fully and reflected in everything I did and everyone I met. It was through these experiences of being thrown into my humanity once more that I began to realize that my soul, me as this essence or this beingness, decided at one point to be human. And maybe, just maybe, I decided to be human for a reason. And what I started to ponder is that maybe the most spiritual thing that I could do in my life is not to just escape back to what we might call heaven, but actually bring about heaven on earth. That maybe the most spiritual thing I could do was to live my life fully in each moment. And that maybe that's what we're all here to do, that we actually came here to learn what it's like to be human, to learn from our experiences. And that in and of itself is an amazing spiritual experience. I love this quote from Wayne Dyer, in which he says, "We aren't human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." And so to this day, I still meditate. I pray sometimes. I read spiritual texts. I engage in devotional practices, and I absolutely love doing so. I love to experience more and more of my spiritual and universal nature, to learn more about the nature of reality, to try to love others with all of my heart and soul. However, I also work, I go to school, I form human relations and human connections, and I have aspirations in this life for a personal mission of sorts that I would like to accomplish as well. And so, what I've learned through studying the teachings of Yogananda, through my own life experience, trying to balance this idea of my spiritual nature and my human nature, is I try to live by three principles. Now, these are three very simple principles, and there's maybe more that you might want to explore or live by, but these three have really seemed to balance me in this dual nature, in being a mortal human being and also an immortal soul, which is number one, have fun. Number two, learn a lot along the way, whatever you're doing in life. And number three is to spread love. And when I find that I'm living by these principles, I find myself fully balanced between my spiritual self and my physical self. I find that the love of the universe abounds in my life. Just as how pure light shines through a stained glass and creates a beautiful array of colors, maybe we, as spiritual beings of light and love, get the opportunity to know our own light through our unique human expression. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong way to live one's life. I think if you want to go to the Himalayas, like Yogananda often felt pulled to, and meditate, go for it. I also think if you want to start a business or you have human aspirations as well, go for it. But what I've found time and time again through both living this human life fully and exploring my spiritual nature is that the prerequisite for a beautiful human life and a beautiful spiritual life is to love. To be loved, to give love, and to know yourself as love, whether you are a Christian, a Muslim, whether you're Jewish, a Buddhist, Hindu, atheist, or whatever have you, whether you're meditating in the Himalayas, or you're running a business, or you're raising kids. To love, I have found, is the most beautiful way to live one's life and to embrace both sides of our dual nature.
Aw. Not sure whether to clap or burst into tears, Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, this is a conversation circle, so we don't need to put Ryan on the hot spot. And by the same token, I imagine that there are questions that folks may want to ask Ryan, and also just life experiences that you have had in regard to this idea of having a dual nature, and how do you live with both? So the floor is open. So great to see that we've had Judy Saltzman join us from South Central California, and Dr. Elizabeth Sotoris is tuning in. I suspect she's here in Honolulu right now. We have Mary Bird in Honolulu, and Kirk is in Santa Barbara, California. Diana is on the big island of Hawaii. Rick, are you in Honolulu? I'm across the island in Kaneohe. Sharone is in San Francisco. And Ryan is tuning in to us from the East Coast. Where are you, Ryan?
I'm in Newton, Massachusetts, about 15 minutes outside of Boston.
Okay, outside of Boston. Judy Saltzman. Judy Saltzman is a retired religious studies professor. Yes, Judy.
Yes, hi Ryan. Thank you for your talk. I didn't catch all of it, but I read Yogananda when I was 17. I was really impressed by his relationship with Sri Yukteswar, and there seemed to be still a higher guru, Babaji, and I had no one to discuss Yogananda. And of course, I found spiritual compatriots. But I wonder if you would comment on the idea there is always a higher guru. And I think that is a very important idea for Yogananda in the yoga in life.
Yeah, what I would say is if you look at anything in nature, it's most things in nature express as fractals. So if you've ever seen one of those plants, sometimes I see them in California. I don't know what they're called, but it follows the same pattern, starting big and then getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So every part of creation, I guess rather I should say the whole of creation is reflected in every part, but that also means that there's always a greater whole to be experienced. And so yeah, I mean, Yogananda was a teacher and inspiration to me. And then he also had his guru, Sri Yukteswar, who had his guru, Lahiri, who had his guru, Babaji, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I believe there's always, I mean, in an infinite universe, or I guess what we could say is the absolute that is filled with infinite potentials, there's always another potential to explore. There's always a new experience to be had. There's always something new to be learned. So I completely agree with that. And I think the other way that I like to picture that too is that uh that the love that these gurus and teachers represent is also infinite in nature. You can't say, I have 2 pounds of love, 10 pounds of love, I have 15 love. Mathematical concepts don't work with love because it's infinite. You just say, I have love. Now, you might say, I have lots of love, and that's also a beautiful expression. So I completely agree. There always is a higher teacher, a higher guru, and typically we can tell who is of a higher echelon, not in a type of judgmental sense, like who's higher or lower, by the amount of love, compassion, and wisdom that they radiate, because those are infinite qualities. You can't have a certain metric of love. There's just boundless love.
Thank you.
I have a question for the group and also for Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, for your presentation. Ryan and I recently took a trip together, and we were listening to audio version of Yogananda's book, and it was completely transporting. He has a very remarkable way of telling stories, is making you feel like you're there in the room when these, remarkable, transformative things are happening to him. It's very moving. But the question that I have, Ryan, or to the group, is one of the, it seems like one of the difficulties that many people run into is finding their work in the world, finding where in Hindu tradition would be their swadharma, their particular path in terms of service to the community, in terms of a life occupation, a life calling, and so on. And I think of my father, who, up until the time he retired, he really hated his job, and yet he kept at it because it was a way of supporting his family, and provided a good income and so on. And but he was really unhappy with the work that he was doing. And and I know you've thought a lot about Ryan in particular, because we've had conversations about this, but I'd be curious too about other folks in the group, how they came about creating an alignment between their spiritual aspirations and their path and what they're doing in terms of fulfilling their more external goals and livelihood and calling, their worldly calling, if we could call it that.
I can kickstart the response here because I think that's a wonderful question, Kirk. It's good to see you again, Kirk. It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, I think, for some people, it's kind of like an instantaneous alignment. We hear stories of like Yogananda was 4 years old and he was like talking about cosmic consciousness and wanting to go meditate. So that's kind of like an instant alignment there. He was going to be a monk, and that was kind of right off the bat. We hear about this with people who are, amazingly talented at one thing. Sometimes it's a musician or an athlete who, right from the age of 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever it is, find their path and their calling right away, and that's wonderful. Um, and sometimes people don't. Sometimes people go down 10 different paths, and I don't think there's just one straightforward answer, and they reach the end of all those paths and say, well, what now? I don't really feel, maybe it's they don't feel happy, or maybe they feel okay, but they feel as if there's something more calling them. And I think the biggest thing is whatever you're doing, at least in my experience, is embrace the journey and embrace mistakes. And now that sounds like a little cliche. That might sound like something that would be on my mom would put on the wall somewhere to remind me and my brothers or something. But I think it's so true and so powerful, because even if you go down a path that might not be your perfect dharma or your perfect calling, or you're temporarily at a job that you don't like or whatever it is, there's still so much learning to be had. Yogananda often liked to use the analogy of movies to describe our lives, that we're all watching these little quick motion pictures of our lives, and then, we return back into spirit. And oftentimes when watching movies, and I love watching movies, the most interesting part of the movie was when the character, either the main character, the hero, whatever it may be, maybe made a mistake, or not even a mistake, but went off the well-warranted path. Maybe one thing seemed totally set up for them, but sometimes the most exciting part of the movie is figuring it out. You actually don't know yet, and you learn so much along that journey as well. So I don't think there's one right thing. I think Joseph Campbell said it well when he said, follow your bliss. But for some people, that takes a lot of time. And I'd say, whatever you're doing, whether you have that spark and that calling right away, right off the gate, or you're still really trying to find it and you've been down 10 or 20 or 30 different paths and you're not sure, uh, I think I love it in that little, like, the three principles that I live by is try to have fun along the way and try to learn a lot. And even if you're not having fun, then learn a lot from that, because that also can teach you a lot as well. So I don't think there's one right answer. I also have only worked only a handful of jobs in my life. I've been a golf caddy, a waiter, and I've mowed lawns, so I don't have a ton of experience with synchronicity. Um, but maybe someone else can jump in on that. But that's what I would say so far, taking from the teachings of Yogananda.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Rick. I have lived in Hawaii for 60 years now. I moved here when I was 20. When I was a child, I grew up in a town called Palo Alto. And Palo Alto was where Stanford was. And as it turned out, I was an ill-sighted child. At age 8, I was asked by my teacher a question I couldn't answer because I couldn't see the question on the chalkboard, sent to the nurse, given an eye test. He's blind. And they sent me to the eye doctor. He's blind, gave me glasses. And as such, I was sent to another school to receive the Stanford Binet IQ test. I was in a room by myself, and a young man named Richard came into the room, and he was a Stanford student, and he gave me the Stanford Binet IQ test. He had a very distinct Boston accent, and we talked one-on-one as he administered it to me verbally, and maybe for an hour or an hour and a half, however long it took. And he stood up and left, and I said bye-bye. And 21 years later, in Steve Smith's house in Honolulu, I was now a 28-year-old yoga teacher. And Richard Alpert, the guy that gave me the IQ test, was Ram Dass. And I was invited to meet Ram Dass because I was the young yogi in Honolulu in 1972, and not very many yoga teachers and meditation teachers in Hawaii at that time. One thing led to another. We were talking, and I said, wait, I know you. And he said, how do you know me? And we're both 6'2" Jewish bearded yogis. I said, you gave me the Stanford Binet IQ test. No, first I said Palo Alto, 1953. And he said, I was there. I say, you gave me the Stanford IQ test in a little room, you and me one-on-one. And he looked at me, and he looked at me, and he said, I did. I remember. And from that point forward, we became lifelong, very fast friends. I think the point being, back to what you were just talking about, spirituality will find you. Your guru will find you without you having to try too hard. As it turned out, Ram Dass and I were spiritual friends. He was not my guru. I had many gurus, as it turned out, but never Ram Dass's path. But we put Ram Dass on for years and years, different workshops, seminars. He stayed at the house forever. He was like a principal member of our family and of my life. And we had wonderful, deep, as you can imagine, conversations, including making a movie together, interviewing him about the Seva Foundation. He was always interested in my travels to India to study with Sai Baba and Muktananda and the Dalai Lama. And we shared our experiences with each of those people through the years. So I think that at the age of 21 now, you are phenomenal. You are, the world is opening to you, and the teachers will reveal themselves to you as you journey. I am, to this day at 79, almost 80, still blown away day in and day out by the synchronistic aspect or nature of the universe and its ability to continually put spiritual teachers, you included, young man, you are amazing. You've got your ducks in a row. You got probably a lot of life to fill in, like caulk for making a brick wall. You're still bricking it in and putting the mortar into the cracks, but that's going to come, and you've set yourself up in a beautiful way to continue the journey. And I acknowledge you. It's really fun listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words. That's just amazing that you were close friends with Ram Dass, because he was actually born in my hometown of Newton, Massachusetts, and he worked with my grandfather.
Really?
Found out years later, yeah. Alan Ivy worked at Stanford. They worked at Stanford together.
Well, that's where I met him. Stanford. He was at Stanford, and I was at Herbert Hoover Elementary School in the same town.
Wow. Well, that is just amazing. Thank you so much for your kind words, and what an incredible, wow, what an incredible line. You could give a talk about what you just said.
What is that?
That you could give a whole talk about what you just said about knowing Ram Dass and that idea of having different paths but being spiritual friends. I mean, your experiences meeting that's just amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, I taught for 50 years, and I taught anyway. That's blah blah about me, but yeah, it is amazing. And there is a video that is up now that Ram Dass and I made together in the 80s. And I made it and I gave it to the Ram Dass Foundation. It's online. Annie, what's the name of it? It's on Vimeo. Yeah. What format? Vimeo. Vimeo? Yeah. Vimeo. Ram Dass and Rick Bernstein on Vimeo if you ever want to watch it. It's cool.
Wow. Thank you.
Just pulled it up recently. Anyway, thanks a lot. It's been fun talking to you.
Thank you.
Call me anytime. Aloha.
I definitely will. I'd love to hear more about your experiences with Ram Dass. Diana, I see your hand raised.
Thank you, Ryan. I want to honor you, Ryan, your ability to communicate clearly and how you are a spiritual teacher, and just your ability to share in the way that you did really touched my heart, and how wonderful that you're learning it so early and can share it with others. That's really a gift, and I just want to honor that in you. For me, my purpose in this life is love and compassion for self and others. It's always been that. And in what I've been playing with lately is we are all one. But I've been really working, I'm a life coach. I was working with a spiritual perspective and the 3D human perspective. Because in the 3D humans perspective, I may not like what I'm doing, or I may feel that it's not what I'm being called to. But from the soul perspective, it is the agreement I made, or where I am to learn or to be present. And so when you talk about learning a lot or just living with love and light, and so no matter what we do, whether we go to the grocery store and we say hello to the checkout lady, we can live that love and light in whatever we do. And we never know exactly what the universe, perhaps some people know very early what their calling is, and yet others, it's like trusting that we are being divinely guided, and that there's divine wisdom in wherever it takes us. And I've been really working a lot with that, because some things are very painful as a human, but then I have to realize that we each have and seeing the pain and suffering in the world, but we each have our own soul journey. And in my opinion, and so it's like really trusting that God is with us and really guiding us to wherever we're supposed to be. And if we do it with an open heart and love, then we're being present in this moment. And I love your have fun and learn a lot, and spread love. And I think those are really important, the 3 important things that really help us live our lives from that place of spirit and physical being one. So thank you. That was really a special talk.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And I think what you said is just so true. I mean, it's all about love. It's all about love, self-love, self-compassion, and compassion for others. I think that's just it couldn't be more true. I think you hit the nail on the coffin there. Absolutely amazing. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you so much. Judy.
I want to comment on what Rick said about Palo Alto. I also grew up in Palo Alto. I went to Mayfield Elementary,
Yeah.
Middle School, and Coverly High School, which no longer exists. And I thought one of the most evil inventions that I had in education and other students suffered from were constant IQ tests. Because at Stanford, may he rest in peace, was constantly using us as guinea pigs.
Yeah.
We're taking this IQ test and that IQ test. And these kids were going around saying, my IQ is 140. What's your IQ? Then your IQ. And it was so diseducational. It wasn't the manas at all. And I absolutely agree. We can't bypass the manas. We need the manas to develop into Buddhi and to the higher consciousness of Atma. And we can't go the other way of Timothy Leary. And he told us when I went to UC Berkeley, just take LSD and that'll solve all your problems. I wasn't as wise as Ryan. I was dumb enough to do it and I almost blew my head off, but I didn't have a bad trip. I learned something. I did learn there was another dimension to reality when I experienced synesthesia and these other. I know that Ram Dass and Timothy Leary knew each other at Harvard, but they took different paths. And I have a feeling that Timothy Leary will eventually spiritually repent about seducing young people into simply taking a drug and saying, if we were really philosophers, we would dare this. Well, I did, and I was fortunate to have come out all right. And I got to realize that it wasn't the way, nor was simply academic education. I was lucky enough to find Unitarianism and then later Theosophy and a real spiritual path. And I see that someone like Ryan is wise enough not to fall into some of the traps that are set for people on the spiritual path, that there is no royal road. It's a long, hard journey, and it isn't always enjoyable. And then an IQ test is not really going to tell you how smart you are. At least now people are talking about EQ, because I knew some high IQ people who were extremely unpleasant. And you know what I mean is some of them were at Stanford and other places. So anyway, your
Thank you for sharing that. If only it were that easy. We could all just take LSD a couple times and be perfect Mahatmas. It'd be very easy. It'd be no struggle whatsoever. But yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest things on my path, and it's something that I really love about theosophy. I know tonight's discussion was about Yogananda and his teachings, but one of the things I love about theosophy is theosophists and students of theosophy often urge you to question everything, right? Don't just blindly accept anything. You're more than welcome to ask questions, pose questions, come back around to something. And that is what really leads to each of our unique paths that are also universal and one at the same time. I think for me, and my path at least, especially making sure to only take what resonates. As much as I absolutely loved Ram Dass and his teachings just opened my heart wide up, there were still things he said that I sometimes questioned, and I think that's a wonderful and good thing. We have to be open to questioning, and I'm glad you're okay after following Timothy Leary's path. And I mean, I'm sure he probably at some points Timothy probably said some wise things. I mean, people can definitely have spiritual experiences on psychedelic compounds, but yeah, I'm not sure. I wouldn't say that that's probably the the best path, the best spiritual path to follow on Timothy's, but um yeah, I think just one of the things I often say to myself, especially when I'm doing uh a lot of reading or listening to podcasts and books that might seem different on the surface, like listening to a more modern spiritual teacher and then reading like the Dhammapada, the teachings of the Buddha, is I always say to myself before I'm gonna take what resonates, question what doesn't resonate, see if maybe it might resonate, or if it doesn't, then I just kind of leave it behind and I try to release fear and embrace love. And I think any teachings that I follow and find within myself that really embrace love always seem to not lead me astray. And I think that leads each of us on our own unique paths. Some of us stumble into a spiritual path through theosophy or through yoga or through Buddhism, and it's so beautiful. But I think what each of them is kind of pointing at from different angles is this core idea or core ideas rather, of us all being a universal family, love being at the essence of the universe, wisdom being something that is innate within all of us and that we can cultivate. So thank you for sharing those experiences with Timothy Leary, and I'm glad you're doing okay after following him for a little while.
He was a Harvard professor, and he was very handsome. And he said to us, they are demonstrating for political freedom outside. I want to tell you about inner freedom. And some of the things he said were true, but I do fear how many people might have taken LSD and really gone down the tubes with it, because I knew an awful lot of people in Berkeley who were in very serious trouble spiritually.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to get out of it and be all right.
And I think that comes right back to our dual nature, because what Ram Dass said is, although he began experimenting with LSD and had what he would describe as mystical and beautiful experiences, he also talked about the importance of grounding them into human life, right? That if you only try to get high all the time on these compounds and only live in the spirit and dissolve your physical form and just live in these altered states of consciousness all the time, you quickly lose your way, right? Just as a tree grows up and kind of reaches up towards the heavens, so too what is often unseen is the root system, which travels deep into the earth and grounds that tree to the earth. And so as we all grow collectively and spiritually, as we reach towards the heavens in pursuit of wisdom and love and compassion and conscious expansion, we must also ground these things, apply them. How are we acting in small moments? Diane, you mentioned, or Diana mentioned, smiling at a grocery checkout line, being kind to a stranger, taking care and looking after our family or other responsibilities or roles in the world. And I think that's where Ram Dass was such an inspirational teacher for me as well, because he really grounded, not at all points of his life, but eventually really grounded both his spiritual life and his human life and everything that he did. And I think that's something that we can all learn from.
And I think maybe I'll take a shot at answering Kirk's question from a while ago, which was how we have found our way into our path that somehow acknowledges both our personal, our physical self and our spiritual self. And I came from a background of one parent who was an atheist and another who was an agnostic, and yet we were part of a Unitarian fellowship. So I did get exposed to the different religions of the world that way, but I kept getting told that, if you believe any of those, really, you're kind of soft-minded. So in terms of, so that I was musing a lot on that. And I also asked lots and lots of those kind of questions that you were mentioning as a child having. My first aspiration in life was to be an elevator operator because I like the feeling in my tummy when I went up and down. After that, the next thing I can remember wishing to be, because I thought I might be able to help the most people in the world, is who had the highest job? Like, was it the president? And my mom told me, well, there's the United Nations and there's a Secretary General of the United Nations. So then I decided that that's probably what I should be. So I went from elevator operator to Secretary General of the UN in my wishes. Somewhere in my teens, I realized that really, whatever I became, it was just important that I helped to decrease the pain, the sorrow of the world, and to increase whatever the opposite of that was, the joy, the love, etc. I became convinced that it really didn't matter what job I took in the world when I had an experience of an elevator operator. And this elevator operator was at UC Berkeley. I think the name of the tower was the Campanile, but it could have been another tower. And so he would take people in his elevator all the way up to the top of the tower so you could get this big view and come back down. And that's all he did for his job. And yet, the way that he did his job was just with so much warmth and welcome to everyone that came into his elevator and wanting to know about their life experience, that he had signed postcards and sometimes photographs from all over the world and all these different buildings in the world that his riders had gone to after riding his elevator. And they remembered him and they'd sent back to him these pictures of him, just letting him know they were still thinking about him from that experience they had with their ride up and down in his elevator. And so that really convinced me that the nature of our job was a lot less important than how we do it. So when I graduated from college, I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I graduated as a political science major because I had been able to, in that way, take a lot of classes from Raghavan Iyer, who was teaching at UC Santa Barbara at the time and who was a wonderful spiritual teacher. But I didn't want to go into government or law or politics, so I just became a teacher because my family had become teachers, and so I became a school teacher, and that was fine until we had 3 kids, and I couldn't hire enough babysitting to, my job wouldn't pay for the babysitting, so my husband said, well, why don't you just join me in my landscaping business, and you answer the phone and do some of the paperwork and stuff, and we'll probably be more successful in a busy business than you would have earned in your teaching job. So I did that. And it really wasn't until I was, I think, 54 years old that I ever had an ambition in the sense of, oh, I know what I want to do. I know what I want to be. And that's when I realized, I won't tell that whole story, but it became very clear to me that I needed to open a mindful movement studio here in Honolulu. And I feel as if, other than having our 3 children, that was my biggest creation as of that time, was that studio. And it was my way of giving to the world, and in a practical way, but also sharing these wonderful, wonderful teachings I've felt blessed to have been given, some way of passing them on, which is why we have Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. It's because it's very in keeping with what I was taught to do by my spiritual teachers, is to share what wisdom that we have. So that's my answer to Kirk's question.
Such a beautiful story. Such a beautiful answer. I think it's so true too, because I listened to one of my favorite teachers is Michael Singer, who was also a follower of Ram Dass and Yogananda, and now a spiritual teacher in his own right. And he was a construction worker at one point, and then he ran like a medical software database company. And he talks about this in his autobiography called The Surrender Experiment, where he surrendered just to the flow of life to see where it would bring him. And it brought him to these incredible places he never thought he would go. And I think that sounds a lot like your story too. And I love what you said, that one quote that you said, which is, it's not so much what you do, but how you do it. And I think that's so key. I think Michael Singer has a quote where he said, you can sweep the floor and be in a state of divine love or a state of ecstasy. You can sweep the floor. Ram Dass used to say one of his spiritual practices was doing the dishes. Was one of his, that it used to always trigger like anger and frustration within him. And so it just became a way that he worked on himself. And actually for him, he talked in one lecture that he gave, he talked about how that became a more important meditation to him for like a few months than his other meditations, because that was where he was confronting his own anger and other things like frustration and feelings of boredom and stuff like that. That's where he was confronting all of that. And I just love what you said there. It's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. And then you do find that spark. What you said, you were 50 or 54 years old, you found it, and you were like, oh, I know what I want to do. And that's wonderful too. That's beautiful. That's just so beautiful.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm seeing that we've reached the top of our hour. I'm going to tell you about our topics for the next couple of weeks, and then perhaps somebody would like to offer to give a vote of thanks to Ryan for his many sharings today. Next week, we're going to be taking up the topic of United We Stand. I'm hoping that we'll have a speaker on the Hawaiian tradition in that regard. There's a beautiful Hawaiian ole or chant that our kumuhula, our hula teacher, has shared with all of us about the walls standing up when we're united. And the following week is actually going to be on the eagle. That's for July 29th. And I can't tell you who the speakers are quite yet, but that will be revealed shortly. I'm not keeping them secret, I'm still pursuing them. So can I ask now for somebody who'd like to give a vote of thanks to Ryan for today?
I can do that.
Thank you, Sharone.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Ryan, and to the rest of everybody here. Thank you so much, because this is such a fascinating topic for me, like a life like thing that I was so passionate about, like our dual nature, our duality, our spiritual being, and our humanity. So thank you so much for all the insights, all the knowledge, all the love pouring through the screen to each other. And yeah, I'm feeling so motivated, so inspired, and so full of like all these beautiful things. So thank you so much. This is one of my favorite talks I ever hear at Yam. So yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate it. So much gratitude.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you.
you all for having me. Thank you for those kind remarks. It was just a fascinating and wonderful discussion. So thank you.
Indeed. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. Exploring your dual nature, finding the balance between the two, bridging them.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Kirk,
everyone.
for recommending good people.
Hey, Roy.
It's been
You.
serendipitous. It just came along. Nature provided.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually thinking about one of your presentations, how you were saying like part of our nature, it's kind of like it's all in our minds, kind of something that remember one of your talks not too long ago, how everything is an illusion,
Yeah.
something like
Yes.
that. I don't know. In this conversation, that kind of came up there, like, and I was wondering,
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
which
Well,
of the philosophies you kind of like identify with, or how do you see that? I'm
are
not
you,
sure what I'm asking, but yeah. Anyway, just saying that I was thinking of you in one of your conversations in this one, and yeah, seeing the
yeah.
integration of the two.
Well, the viewpoint Yogananda offers is very, very much aligned with some of those themes that I was trying to develop regarding Advaita Vedanta,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
Gandhi's view,
Mm,
and yeah, that whole idea of integrating the immortal with the mortal, recognizing that it's a Maya, but also that there is a dharma to fulfill it. It's a avenue for service.
yeah.
So yeah, we could talk for another hour on that, but
Yeah.
fortunately our time is up.
Thank you so much again, Ryan, for tuning in from so far away and giving a beautiful presentation from the heart as well as the mind.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, it seems like everyone here, I'd be so excited to listen to anyone else speak as well. Rick, your stories with Ram Dass and in India, and Judy with your stories with Timothy Leary and finding Yogananda at 17. And Kirk, I mean, you always have good wisdom to share. So, anyone, and yeah, and sorry, I didn't get your name. Sorry,
Sharoni.
Oh,
Sharona.
Sharone.
Sharoni, or am I saying that right?
Sharone. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
It's just beautiful. So, yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you for
Bye.
the feedback.
Night. Aloha.
Aloha.
Bye-bye.